Hi everyone, it's Mrs. Bebo. In this video, we're going to take a look at applying integer operations. So what exactly does that mean for our learning target? Basically, how do you solve integer problems that involve more than one operation? Anytime that we have more than one operation involved means we're going to have to follow our order of operations. All right, so for our order of operations, I always encourage my students to write it out as follows. P4, again, parentheses, right? So these are our grouping symbols. So parentheses. And again, grouping symbols, which I have now written inside of a set of parentheses, but it also includes, basically, we have giant fraction bars, right? So you have something written up at the top, you got something written at the bottom. You're going to solve what's on top, solve what's on bottom, and then the last step is to worry about that step there, which is essentially saying to divide those two values. So those fraction bars, that is a set of grouping symbols, absolute value. So again, you have something written inside there, right? That's a set of grouping symbols. You also have square brackets. So parentheses aren't just parentheses. It's any of our grouping symbols. Then our next step in our order of operations are exponents. So exponents, so anything could be positive, it could be negative, could be a fraction. In 7th grade, you're only going to worry about whole number exponents. But yeah, exponents are going to be taken care of next. Then this is where it gets a little bit different than what you might see other people write our acronym out as. I like to write multiplication and division next to each other. So I write multiplication, comma, division. And then I have my students write an arrow underneath, because when you get to this step, you've taken care of all the parentheses, right? All those grouping symbols, done. You have taken care of the exponents. The next thing is to worry about multiplication and division. But you have to go from left to right. So starting at the left side of our expression, we're going to start with, either multiplication or division, whatever comes first on the left, and then make our way through the rest of the expression, again, going in order from left to right. So this is our multiplication and division. So multiply or divide, and again, from left to right. So from left to right. And I think that's the piece that some people miss. And that's why we see on the internet a lot, we see these different things where it's like, oh, which one's the true answer? Because people forget about this step, as well as the last one with addition and subtraction, that you have to go from left to right. So addition and subtraction, and again, left to right. So add or subtract, and again, from left to right. So our order of operations is something that's so important in math. It's something you guys are going to see throughout your math careers, and it helps us to make sure that we are solving these problems in a consistent way. So again, parentheses, exponents, multiplication and division from left to right, and then addition and subtraction from left to right. So let's now apply that to some actual problems. Taking a look at our first example, we have some pretty straightforward, evaluate each expression. We have our values already in these expressions. We're going to see some examples coming up where we're given algebraic expressions, so we have to do a little bit more work before then. So when we solve order of operation questions, I always encourage my students to work down their page. I also encourage them to underline whatever they're doing first. So in this first example, we have 4 times 6 plus negative 10. So what I've underlined is our multiplication. We have to do multiplication before addition. So 4 times 6 is going to be 24. So we're going to have 24 plus negative 10. And now we can go ahead and add these two. And 24 plus negative 10, different signs, so we subtract. That's going to be 14, and it's going to be positive since we had more positives. And then that's it for that one. Now for the second example, negative 90 divided by 10 plus negative 9. So yes, this might look like a fraction, but again, that is just indicating you're dividing those two. So negative 90 divided by 10 would have to be our first step. That is going to be a negative 9. Then we still have this plus negative 9 hanging out, and now that's our final step. Negative 9 plus negative 9, that is going to end up being negative 18, because again, same sign, add like normal, keep the sign. Now for our last example on this page, we got 9 times negative 5 times negative 2 minus a negative 16. So we have a little bit more going on in this last example here. Now the nice thing about multiplication, because that's what we're going to have to do first, we have this huge group of multiplying here, right? 9 times negative 5 times negative 2. You can multiply those in any order that you want because multiplication follows the commutative property. So you could do 9 times negative 5 first and then multiply by negative 2. You also could do negative 5 times negative 2 and then multiply that answer by 9. Totally up to you. I like to go through and if I can multiply my factors that have the same sign. So I'm going to do -5 times -2 first, and then that's going to give me a positive 10. And again, you don't have to do it that way. You could have totally just gone from left to right. But again, multiplication follows that commutative property, which is why we're allowed to multiply those in any order that we want. So we still have a little bit more multiplying to go here, so that's why we're going to continue to multiply. We're going to do 9 times 10, which is 90. So we got 90 minus a -16. We're going to keep change when we're subtracting integers. So keep the 90, change that subtraction to addition, change that -16 to its opposite, and then this just turns into 90 plus 16, which is 106. All right, so this next set is where we're gonna step up the difficulty a little bit, because now we're given these algebraic expressions. So they're these expressions that are composed of variables, and we're responsible for plugging in those values into the correct places within these expressions and then evaluating to come up with that single solution. Students tend to make the biggest mistake by not paying attention to what these values are. So we'll miss negative signs, right? We might miss, we put A in for B or vice versa, right? So always double check that you're plugging in those correct values. I know I've been victim of this. I've seen many of my students fall victim to this, right? So just make sure that you're double checking so that you hopefully don't make that mistake. So starting with the first one, it says we have A times B divided by D plus C. So A is -4, so we're going to have -4 multiplied by B, which is 6, divided by D, which is -3, plus C, which is a -14. So now going through this, we're going to follow our order of operations. Now that we actually have values in for those variables, we can go through and evaluate. So -4 times 6 is where we're going to start. So we're actually going to start at the top here. That's going to be our first step. So -4 times 6 is going to be a -24. Then we still have that divided by -3 plus a -14 on the end. Now our next step is to worry about this division. So -24 divided by -3 is going to be a positive 8. And we still have that plus -14. And then -8 plus -14, again, is going to be our last step here. And when we have different signs, when we're adding, the trick is to subtract and keep the sign of what you have more of. So this is going to end up being a -6. So that first expression ends up going all the way down to -6. All right, let's take a look at another one. So with number 2, we have A times D divided by B minus, and then in parentheses, A plus C. So we have the quantity of A plus C being added together. So we have A, which is -4, times D this time, so that's -3, and then that's being divided by B, which is positive 6, minus, and then in parentheses we have -4 plus, and then a -14 for C. All right, so with this one, we're going to start with our parentheses first. So inside the parentheses, we do have this addition problem going on, so we're going to figure out what that's equal to. So -4 plus -14, they're the same sign, so we're going to add like normal and keep the sign. So we have -4 times -3 divided by 6 minus, and then inside the parentheses, we get -18. So we took care of parentheses. Now we move on to our multiplication and division step. Technically, we actually are still working with a grouping symbol because we do have this fraction bar, which is separating the top from the bottom. But we're going to do this multiplication first, because technically that would be in order from left to right, especially if we wrote that dividing by 6 off to the side, because it would be read as -4 times -3 divided by 6. So we have to do that -4 times -3 first. So that's going to be 12, and then divided by 6 minus, again, -18 on the end there still. Taking care of the division next, so 12 divided by 6 is going to be 2. And we have minus -18. And then when we are subtracting integers, we are going to keep the 2, change that subtraction to addition, and then -18 becomes a positive 18. So keep, change, and then 2 plus 18 is 20. And so there's our final answer for that question. And then on number 3, we actually have an exponent involved this time. So b to the third divided by d minus the grouping of c plus d. So again, we need to get started by plugging in what each of these variables are. So we have 6 to the third divided by d, which is -3. Then we have minus, and then in parentheses, -14 plus, and then we have d, which is -3. So again, we just went through, we plugged in the actual values for each of those variables. So 6 to the third is going to be 6 times 6 times 6, which is 216. So I'm going to actually do a couple of steps at the same time. So I'm taking care of that 216, or the 6 to the third, excuse me, which is 216. I'm also going to take care of the grouping symbols at the same time. And I'm allowed to do this because essentially we are doing both grouping symbols first. We're also taking care of the exponent, right? We can do that because it's separated by a subtraction sign. Now, if we had something else going on in between here, multiplying, dividing, right, or another set of parentheses, it could make it kind of weird. But the subtraction does allow you to kind of take a shortcut, so to speak, which is why I'm doing these both simultaneously. So -14 plus -3 is going to be a -17. I'm going to go ahead and write that in parentheses so I don't lose that negative. And then we're going to go through and do our division. So now we're going to go back and to the left here. So 216 divided by -3. So 216 divided by -3, that's going to be a negative, and in this case 72. And then we still have the subtracting -17 on the end there. So now that we're subtracting integers, again, the trick is to keep change. So we're going to keep the -72, change this to addition, change this to its opposite. So it turns into -72 plus +17. And now that we have different signs, the trick is to subtract the two and keep the sign of what you have more of. So 72 minus 17 is 55, and we have more negatives, so it's going to be a -55. And that's it for that question. So hopefully that helps you with some of the order of operation questions you're going to see with integers. I do have a part 2 video that will go through some more variable expressions and how to solve problems like that, as well as a couple story problems. So make sure you check out part 2 if you need some more help. Thanks for watching.